I built an aquarium stand, and it's a doozy. Here's a little peek at the finished product. Like I said, it's really big.
Oh yeah.
In inches, that'll be 121 by 30 by 40. When we're completely done, it'll look like this one that's underneath Alcatraz, my 240-gallon African cichlid tank, except bigger. It's super strong, and I'm going to show you in detail how I did it, so stick around. I'm using the plans from one of Joey the King of DIY's videos because he's a frickin' rocket scientist. The link to that video is in the description. But I'm including one or two tweaks that I think will be really helpful to you, plus some info that might even make it easier for you to make your own stand. This is my dad, and we're gonna together build the stand for the new huge aquarium that I have coming from Custom Aquariums. But you have any words of wisdom to aquarium stand builders out there, Dad?
Well, the best thing to remember is to measure twice and cut once.
Here's a look at the tools I'll be using. This is a combination square to make sure that my cuts are nice and straight. These 2.5-inch screws are strong, and it's important to use good quality screws because they'll help with the overall structure of the stand and increase the weight load it can carry. But these screws also countersink really easily because of their special design. Highly recommend. I use an impact driver, which makes the job a lot easier. And this 90-degree corner clamp. I saw Joey using one on the video, but he didn't mention the exact name or where he bought it, so I just looked up corner clamp on Amazon and Google. The results kept on bringing up other items. The link is in the video description. You're welcome. And a drill to make sure I'm not splitting any of my lumber. I'm using this to cut my 2x6s, but any miter saw will do. And this table saw for my plywood top. We're working on the top of the stand right here, and those 90-degree corner clamps are coming in extremely handy, so when we drive the screws, the lumber stays right where we want it. I chose 2.5-inch screws so they'll be long enough to go well into the second 2x6. I believe I heard Joey on one of his videos say that he was using drywall screws. I might be wrong, but I've seen those break really easily, and again, the ability of these screws to easily countersink is amazing. They're strong and extremely easy to use. Whoever invented these things has to be really proud of himself. And rich. Just doing the same thing to the other side now. The top and bottom frames have to be spot on. It has to be square or your tank won't be up to the task. Even a small fish tank is extremely heavy. Mine, when filled, will weigh about 4,500 pounds.
What?
That's more than one of these. So make sure your stand will be able to support your tank, but also that your floor can support that much weight. Don't want that thing come crashing down. Make your cuts spot on and then check to make sure it's square later on. I'll show you how to do that a bit further along in the video. We're building an exact duplicate of what we just made now. This one will actually be the bottom even though it's on top because we're going to be flipping this over in a minute. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention, I'm using 3 screws on each end.
Subscribe or someone dies. Ding ding.
The next step is to add the guides for the corner supports, and these will have no structural value at all. Their only purpose is to give you something to screw your supports into. And I don't want anything touching the ground except for the 4 boards that make up the frame. So I'm having it rest on a cut-off piece of 2x6 to make sure it doesn't touch the ground. Too many points of contact with the ground, and I think you're just asking for problems with it being level in my opinion. And this will actually be the top because we'll be flipping it like I said, but I'm using the same practice for both the top and bottom for the guides. Just make them a little short. Here we are actually flipping the stand so that the bottom is now the top and the bottom piece should just fall to the ground. You can do this really easily by yourself with a 4-foot stand made of 2x4s, but for these larger stands, it's good to have a buddy help you. You want this to stay up on its own, so take some of the corner supports and just pop them into place. These are the pieces you'll be screwing into the guides. They are what's going to provide the most support for your aquarium, remember, not the guides you're screwing them into, so these you want to fit snugly. They need to be making contact with the bottom board and the top board. So if you remember, we only screwed the guide into the top of the frame, so the bottom end of the guide is just hanging free now, so we'll screw that in. And it's a lot easier, I'll figure this out in a minute, if I screw the board from the back side. So you're screwing into the frame, not into the guide from the frame side. I just needed to hop inside the stand and screw from the other way. No big deal though. Once we have the supports in snug at the top and bottom, nestled firmly in the corners, it's time to get them attached. We started off using 4 or 5 screws per leg, but I later changed it to 8 for added support. You can kind of see here that we didn't actually screw all of the guides into the frame for some reason, and I, for the life of me, can't remember why that happened, but you'd want to screw those in first before you start attaching the supports. Brain fart. Another set of supports will go around the other side of the corner on each end. And here we are using our college-educated brains to delicately add a little force to a tight-fitting support that doesn't want to go where it belongs. And I only used 4 screws directly into the thin edge of the guide, but I think I'll be adding a few more screws through it and into the support right next to it as well. Extra strength. And here we are after day 1. You could probably do this a lot more quickly than we did, but we did get a late start and had to go lumber shopping, then cut all the pieces as well before we got this thing going, so that ate a lot of our time. We're about halfway done and we'll get to day 2 here in a second. If you find the idea of building your own stand pretty daunting, it really isn't so difficult. I mean, even I can do it, and that's saying something. If there's a hard part to building your own aquarium stand, then we've already done it. Day 2 is pretty simple. At this point, the frame won't be square and have enough support to keep it from shifting side to side if you place pressure on it. We'll fix that by adding some bracing firmly against the guides in each corner. Make sure it's flush with the outside frame by using something like a square. You don't want it sticking up too high. These will not only keep the stand from shifting side to side, but it'll also give your aquarium some support throughout if you have an acrylic tank or a larger glass tank. Acrylics have a flat bottom and need support not just under the edges of the tank, and large glass tanks sit on a foam pad and also need this extra support. Something like a framed glass 75-gallon tank and smaller will only be making contact around the perimeter of your stand's frame, so these would then only be used for your stand stability. As you can see, we're also doing this on the bottom of the stand, and eventually we'll add some towards the center of the tank as well. Notice that on the bottom braces I have them slightly higher to keep them from possibly adding another contact point with the floor. Don't want any wobbles with this baby. Now it's time to make sure this thing is square. If it isn't square now, then your stand strength is compromised. You check for square by measuring from one corner diagonally to the corner on the other side. Do this from one corner and then do it on the other side. Should be exactly the same measurement. If it isn't, then your cuts are off and you're going to need to correct them. I'm sorry, but this is going to be a real pain in the ass for you. Fortunately, mine are all good. Next, I'm adding some center guides for more vertical braces. If you have a 4-foot tank or smaller, then you don't need any additional supports than what we already have. But if it's larger, then you should have at least one more support for every additional 4 feet. My stand is 10 feet long, so I'm adding 2 more, and these will also be the frame for the doors I'll be adding to the stand at a future date. Ain't got no time for doors now. I just gotta get something to put my tank on when it arrives so I don't have to move it twice. It's so heavy it's gonna take about 6 strong guys to move it, or 12 wimpy ones. Notice that I'm still keeping these from touching the floor with my spacers. Also, to keep the guides and the actual supports that I'm adding now centered where I want them, I've drawn a line on the frame where the center of the board should be, and I've drawn a line at the center of my guide and support like this. Just line these up and you're good.
Nice and easy.
Adding the center supports is the same process as adding the corner supports. Just make sure they all fit snugly. They can't be loose at all, but they also shouldn't be so tight that they'll push the frame. I'm using 8 screws per support, 4 sets of 2 screws in each board. Time to add more bracing in the middle. Shit. 1 on each side of the vertical guide for added stability. And then I'm just dividing the distance in the larger openings and adding another support there. We did the same thing on the bottom, ingeniously using these little cardboard spacers to keep them from touching the ground, but after talking with Mark at Custom Aquariums, I decided to swap them out for 2x4s to allow more room inside the stand for the sump. I'll be adding 3/4 inch plywood to the top for the foam pad and aquarium to rest on. Make sure your tank will rest either completely on the outside frame or completely on the plywood if necessary. And make sure your tank also sits level on the stand. Any unsupported parts of your tank, or if it isn't level, will create stress and possibly cause a huge disaster. Let me know if you have any questions about building your own aquarium stand. I do answer every comment on my videos, so if you ask me a question, you're going to get a response. The next step for me is just doing some finish work on the stand, and if I don't get that done before the aquarium arrives, then at least I have the stand ready and a place to put that aquarium when it gets here. And that's a wrap.